undeniably evident that the climate change is resulting due to the human-induced greenhouse gas emissions, and increased levels of heat trapped in the atmosphere have set off the process that is modifying the weather patterns, which in turn affecting temperature and precipitation frequencies as well as intensities and impacting our city. So we, the urban unit, brought up a session that would talk about the present challenges to the cities of Punjab, the way forward for climate resilient cities, the health argument for climate action, as well as how to mainstream climate change, which is unfortunately still be considered as a federal subject. To discuss these agendas, I would like to request our panelists to come to the stage. Mr. Umar Masood, the CEO, Urban Unit, Government of Punjab. Mr. Mujtaba Hussain, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Climate Change, Government of Pakistan. Dr. Mehreen, Climate Change and Health Expert. Whereas the session will be moderated by Mr. Rafay Alam, a well-known environmental lawyer and activist. It will be a 40 to 45-minute panel discussion session, right, sir? Followed by a launch ceremony of 2 reports. So over to you, Mr. Rafay.
I'll carry anyway. Thank you all for attending this session on climate resilient cities organized by the Urban Unit. I'm also thankful that there are some very friendly faces and some experts here that we could perhaps even get some question and answers and some opinions from as well. I have a very distinguished panel with me. Mr. Umar Masood is a master's in public policy from Princeton and has a PhD from MIT in urban policy. He's currently the CEO of the Urban Unit. Dr. Mehreen is a health expert looking at climate change, but through the lens of gender and equity. And Mujtaba Saab is Additional Secretary at the Ministry of Climate Change and one of Pakistan's lead negotiators at the Conference of Parties. He's also Hubert Humphrey's Fellow from Cornell University. So thank you all very much for being here. I'm just going to set the stage a little bit and then pass on to our panelists. I just want to set the stage by saying climate change is caused by greenhouse gases, and climate change has disrupted our weather systems and is pushing them out of balance. Our weather systems have been in balance since the last ice age. And when I say कि ये balance में है, it means that there is sufficient ecosystems or sufficient light and sufficient water in enough balance to sustain the large-scale agriculture upon which our societies rest. And it's this balance that greenhouse gases and global warming is disrupting. We're sitting here at the beginning or the middle of March. It shouldn't be this hot, for example. This is the coolest summer for the rest of your lives. This is going to be the coolest summer for the rest of your lives. And Pakistani cities are right in the middle of this. We are at the middle of several fault lines when it comes to climate change. One is this incredible heat. I'll remind you, in 2014, there was a 1-week heat wave in Karachi, which cost us over 1,000 lives. And then we have in Pakistani cities some of the most unbearable air pollution, which is taking lives, years of our life expectancy away. And I'll remind you that most greenhouse gases or most air pollutants are in fact greenhouse gases. So Pakistan is at the epicenter of this air apocalypse, which is threatening our lives. The heat wave is upon us. And the question is, how should our cities respond? Because most Pakistanis now live in cities. We have a population over 50% of which now lives in urban areas. They're dependent on these cities. And how do our cities then respond to these challenges? I'll start with you, Umar Saab, because with your work at the Urban Unit, and also I wanted to bring in this emissions inventory that you've worked on. How do you survey the scene right now with Pakistani cities and their ability to be resilient in the face of the climate crisis?
Voice that I can, yes I am. Okay, so when we talk about resilience, this is a very hard word when it comes to climate change. You can be resilient from an engineering point of view or from an infrastructure point of view. You can be resilient from a climate mitigation point of view or an adaptation point of view. But if you are talking about Pakistani cities, I see, resilience in a wider framework. And that is that all the citizens of the city are in some ways they are being affected by climate change, we are able to, develop policy that it affects positively all citizens. So, I think our debate on resilience in cities and climate change has not gone down to the level of the citizenry of the cities. It has been a very intellectual debate, and because it has not gone down to the level of the citizens, you do not see at the local level any type of voice regarding climate change, or how do we contextualize climate change within a city. These are very hard questions that we tend to ignore. I think even in this discussion, sometimes we fly at such a high altitude that the city gets lost, somewhere. I would have loved that this would have been a discussion about the neighborhood of Lahore, about the citizens of Lahore, and particular issues which are affecting neighborhoods or areas of Lahore with reference to climate change. And there you could be, you could have a much more enthusiastic conversation, even as far as civil servants are concerned, because they can actually relate to the context in the city in which they are working. And I think, when it comes to climate change in cities, this is what the urban unit's first challenge is, that how to percolate the message of climate change at the city level. We have a message of climate change at the federal level. There are some traces of it at the provincial level, but there is hardly any trace of climate change at the local level. And I think this is our biggest challenge before we even think of the second or the third step. I would end my remarks over here, and as the discussion proceeds, I would like to add further to it. Thank you.
Which actually sets me up perfectly to ask Mujtaba Saab a question. This percolation of climate knowledge down to the cities is necessary. It involves devolution and certainly democracy and local governance. Sir, aap wafaq mein baithe hue hain. You're a federal ministry on a subject that's not even in the federal list. How do you see, or what is your view on how this federal responsibility should be brought down, not just to the provinces, but as locally as possible?
Bringing the debate on climate change right down from the federal to the provincial and downstream to the community or the local level. And I would say that first of all, the problem lies in actually understanding the issue regarding climate change. We don't have a proper understanding of this issue, I would say, not only at the federal level, but also at the provincial and at the local level. It is absolutely, I would say, nobody understands what do we mean by climate change. So that message has to actually go down, percolate, not only from the federal to the provincial district, but down to the tehsil and union council level. And in this respect, the main responsibility lies on not only the federal government, but also the provincial government in terms of mainstreaming climate change into the development process. What I mean by development process is whatever is happening, any kind of project that is taking place, whether it's the federal level or the provincial level, the word climate change needs to be mainstreamed before giving any approval to any project. We do these EIAs and IEEs, but we are still missing on the climate change perspective into the developmental process. And until and unless that is done, I think we will not be mainstreaming climate change holistically, and the debate would not go down to the community level. So this understanding has to actually, right from the federal to the provincial, to the district, to the tehsil, to the union council level. And we all understand that actually the communities are the forefront. I mean, they are the main people who face the challenges of climate change. And that too, women, children, and the elderly are the ones who are mostly affected by this problem. And we do understand that these recurring climate extreme events are happening almost every year in a country like Pakistan. We are amongst the top 10 vulnerable countries as far as the global climate risk vulnerability index is concerned. So it is very important that we need to be prepared. The issue lies in terms of our preparedness, our adaptation to the challenges. We emit less than 1% of the GHG emissions on a cumulative scale. So our problem is adaptation. So the message actually, understanding adaptation, understanding the problem, has to actually go down, percolate. I mean, the word that is used by Umar is very pertinent. It has to percolate right from the top level down to the local level. It's just like thinking, globally, acting locally. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Saiba, when we talk about climate change, it's very technical. Greenhouse gases, 1.5 degrees, conference of parties. But in your experience working in the health sector, can you help identify for us some of the health impacts that climate change brings to Pakistani cities and open our eyes on this level?
I think that's a major step we are taking in Pakistan, because how many times do we have health as a discussion when we are discussing climate change policies? I think it's the first time, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so when you have more than 800,000 premature deaths worldwide attributed to climate change alone, I mean, whether it's because of the cardiovascular diseases, whether it's diabetes, whether it's obesity, malnutrition, you can name any number of health conditions. Climate change is one of the most important etiologically attributed factors for a lot of health problems that are arising in our communities. When Ella Kissy Deborah in 2013, when she was a young girl living in London, when she died, medical inquest was carried on and they realized that she died because of air pollution. That was the first time that they realized that they could even have legal implications for deaths attributed to climate-related problems. So as time is passing by, we are realizing that more and more conditions are in humans are because of can be attributed to all the climate-related issues. In Pakistani cities, especially in Lahore, a lot of research has been carried on amongst fetal abnormalities which are attributed to air pollution. Other than heart condition, bronchitis, lung cancers and all that. Recently, research was conducted by one of the institutes in Lahore as well as Aga Khan. 25,000 deaths, premature deaths, are attributed in Pakistani cities alone to climate change related catastrophes and problems. So health is one of the most important issues which we need to discuss, and I think it's an important forum where we are addressing such an issue. Thank you.
I note that Kamil Khan Mumtaz is in the audience, and one thing I've learned, Kamil Saab, from you is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that cities are incredibly parasitic on the ecosystems that they occupy. They're very destructive to the environment, and I think this is going to be the basis of my question, Umar Saab. Okay, how can cities that are the cause of environmental destruction and one of the causes of climate change, how can they be used in the fight against the climate crisis? What are the options available to urban practitioners to deal with this?
Well, this is a good question because one thing, if we few steps back, we should remember that everything happens in space, on land. And in cities or in the landscape of the cities, that is the only land in an entire country which is regulated in some way. There are zoning laws, there are land use policies, it is regulated in some way. The rest of the rural landscape is unregulated. We don't have agriculture zoning or agriculture zoning policies of that sort. We don't have environmental zones of that nature. So cities in a way they can be a cause of they can accentuate climate change, or they can be harbinger of adaptation strategies for climate change. But from an urban planning perspective, let's get down to the basics. And the economics of this has is very, very strong. And that is that the denser the city, the less climate change footprint it would have. And the more sort of less dense and the more spread out the city, the more it would affect, it would have a larger climate change, footprint. And, when we talk about cities and how can cities have an adaptation strategy, one thing is that we need to start living in a much more densified environment. Now, if you look at Lahore, Lahore is a peculiar case in the sense that, let me ask the question from this audience, how many of you, when they came to this session, came on their own transport or used public transport? I just want to have, count of hands who came on public transport or walked. There you are. It is less than 10% of the audience which has used public transport. And I went to HSN, so I live just in the neighborhood. My house is 2.5 kilometers from this venue. I drove. Not that I cannot walk, but I remember there used to be a footpath across the mall, or along the mall, which is now either becoming narrower by the day, or I've got used to the car and the air conditioning in my car that I don't want to walk. There is hardly any bus which goes every 5 minutes that you can just simply take it at the Canal Road junction and drop yourself off where the Alhambra starts. So, there is no way that you can actually commute in this city without having cars. And one of the, sort of a fallacy is that we think of cars that we are traveling long distance in cities. In fact, transport pollution which is happening all across the cities in the world is basically over short distances. You are taking your car to buy groceries, you are taking your car to drop your kids, picking up your kids. These are the sources which are actually contributing to transport pollution, because the cities are not planned in such a way that you allow people to walk, or public amenities are at a distance which are convenient. Greater efficient engines or transport, as far as transport technology is concerned, having a Euro 4 or a Euro 5 is not going to bring the climate footprint down by that much. It's the mileage that you travel in your car, even if it is a Euro 5, that is actually affecting it. And if you see Lahore, ironically, the walled city of Lahore, or the denser parts of Lahore, are the people which are actually contributing in reducing that footprint. And it's us, the more upper income classes or the middle to upper income classes, who are actually contributing to increasing that footprint. We've gone beyond drive-in. We are now sort of trying to conquer Ravi and across the banks of that river. So I feel that even within this city, if I see the future as far as climate change and cities is concerned, there is going to be a great debate that who contributes as far as transport pollution is concerned. And these are the debates that we should be really talking about before we have any action or any policy with regard to the cities.
Thank you, sir. Uh, I want to point out there is a footpath from here all the way to Miamir Bridge on Mal Road. It's probably the only footpath in the city of Lahore. ये अंग्रेज़ों के ज़माने का बना हुआ है. Other parts of Lahore, post-partition, you won't hardly find a sidewalk, even in the new housing societies. And just to respond, I don't mean to take any time, but just to respond to your point about cities being unplanned, I'll sort of challenge that and say, no, they are planned, but for the wrong principles and reasons. For example, from here, you can go to Lake City, which is a housing scheme. And once you cross the canal, यहाँ से canal तक मेरा ख्याल 3 signal हैं, उसके बाद सिर्फ एक और है. It's all signal free, all the way to Lake City, because these property developers have been able to leverage their political influence and then draw municipal services to them. Municipal services like roads, like water, like electricity, like gas, just to cater to this very elite section of society that can afford these multi-million rupee houses. So our cities are being designed, and in fact, to follow your point up, if the pollution is being caused by the rich, it's the elite capture of our cities that are destroying the environment. Speaking of which, Mujtaba Sahab, you had said that, you know, the well-known phrase, Pakistan doesn't emit much greenhouse gases, but we're facing the brunt of it. I think everyone's familiar with this, especially in light of last year's floods in Pakistan. But surely there's more than just adaptation that's needed in our cities. Umar Saab was talking about mitigating things like greenhouse gases through combating air pollution. What's your view on this? I really don't want to think that only adaptation is necessary in Pakistan. I want to challenge that view of yours and say, no, there's far more we have to do with mitigation as well.
I think what I focused more in my previous intervention was that, you know, we need to adapt more from the perspective of our contribution on a cumulative level. But these cumulative emissions are going to increase with the passage of time. If we take our population growth and the current population, which is more than 220 million, probably reaching almost 250 million. So in that respect, our emissions have certainly increased or are going to increase in future. So mitigation is also our issue. And mitigation from the perspective of a number of sectors, whether it's transport, whether it's agriculture, whether it's the industry. So everything is affecting actually climate change, and climate change per se in terms of temperature rise. So in case of Pakistan, the average temperature rise is more than the global temperature rise. So this is very alarming. So when I say we have to adapt and we have to be prepared to tackle the challenge of climate change, I don't mean that mitigation is not our issue. But certainly in terms of mitigation, what I would add to what Umar has said, it's actually the lifestyle changes. Simple things like, you know, the commuting transport, using public transport, going towards the cleaner elements of energy, transport, and all these practices. And common things like, you know, it's not something which is a rocket science or that you have to go from one place to another, you can use a bicycle. I mean, I was very close by in a hotel which is probably almost more than 100 meters from here, but I used a car in coming to the Alhambra Arts Council. So I would say that's not a healthy practice. So we need to change our lifestyles, and mitigation is certainly as a part of as a responsible country which is in the global community. And once we go and sit in all these climate change debates where we have to face the criticism from the developed countries when they point out that it's a country of almost like 250 million people. So we cannot really count on only the argument that, you know, our contributions are less than 1%, so we will not mitigate or we will not do those activities which actually would contribute to the reduction of GHG emissions. And mind you, you know, climate change is a global phenomenon. It is not a local phenomena. So whatever we are throwing into the atmosphere, it is going into the atmosphere which is common. So it's actually a tragedy of the commons. And so from that perspective, certainly mitigation is also equally important. But in terms of Pakistan, certainly, I mean, we have to make our population understand first climate change and try to make them get prepared in terms of reducing our impacts in terms of the challenges that we are facing. And in one year, in 2022, where we faced multiple challenges. First of all, it was the temperature rise, then it was the forest fires, then we had the, the mega floods. So it's a cascade of climate extreme events that are happening, and the frequency and intensity is increasing with the passage of time. So that's where we need to adapt more, understand the challenge, and be prepared for it.
That also, I suppose, sets me up for a question to Dr. Mehreen, that how much can we adapt? The floods of last year are, I mean, biblical. 30 million people displaced. There's still vast tracts of Balochistan and Sindh that is still underwater because the water has nowhere to go. And that flood blew a $30 billion hole in our economy that I don't think we can recover from anytime soon. So the question is that beyond adaptation, can we really adapt to the severity of the climate crisis? Do you think that we have the ability to do so? Because the argument that Mujtaba and the Ministry of Climate Change made at COP last year is that some events are now beyond adaptation. We need a super fund, a loss and damage fund, to be able to deal with these sorts of things. And so when you see the increase in temperature, when you see the air pollution, do you think we can move fast enough, or is it head for the hills?
Okay, so let me reiterate, our health is a non-negotiable commodity. So when you talk about human body, it's not going to adapt to temperatures beyond 2 degrees, you know. We don't have the capacity, we don't have the thermodynamic mechanism to adapt to something like that. So when we demand as health professionals to keep the temperatures below 1.5 degrees, that is one of the major public health goals right now, because humans cannot live in temperatures which are higher than that. And especially the vulnerable communities, which includes little children and elderly people. When you mentioned about the heat waves in 2014, most of the people who died were usually the elderly and the little children. So when you talk about adaptation in terms of human body, I guess that's what your question is. I mean, that's not actually, we cannot. I mean, you know, we cannot, because the anthropogenic activity which is causing all this destruction to our environment, human body is not capable of adapting itself to all the changes, and the changes which are happening at such a rapid speed. As far as air pollution is concerned, I mentioned before also 800,000 deaths worldwide, premature deaths because of air pollution. I mean, you know, you cannot adapt to that. Bronchitis, lung cancers, there is DNA malformation in unborn fetuses, changes in maternal morbidity, mortality. So for a country like Pakistan, which already has a very fragile health system, any shift or skew towards anything which brings more patients to the hospitals, which are already ill-equipped to deal with normal number of patients, I mean, we are not capable of any imbalance in our health system. And the out-of-pocket expenditure is already quite a lot for most of our people, because there is no health insurance. And the communities and the vulnerable populations that are impacted by the health impacts of climate change, most of them do not have the resources and the ability to spend money. So there is a debate about inequitable distribution of wealth and health resources being inequitably distributed. So there are a lot of things which we can discuss under this umbrella. Thank you.
No. Thank you for that intervention. You know, the 800,000 people dying prematurely because of air pollution is, I think, a WHO statistic.
Yes,
it's about 1 million people a year. But you have to understand, this is not sort of distributed equally around the world. They are hotspots of air pollution, and that is Asian and African cities.
Absolutely.
So this million people a year, ये हमारे खित्ते में लोग मर रहे हैं, हमारे लोग मर रहे हैं. This is not it's not happening in Europe, it's not happening in Canada.
25,000 लोग तो हमारे मुल्क में मरे. So that's a lot. That's a big number.
Much more than that, I would
And major
imagine.
cities. So we have to, and the problem is in our countries where we don't have a lot of resources for health, for research. So quantifying the
There is always a chance that the city would get flooded. But I think in the previous government, they had actually made an embankment 42 kilometers long, so to mitigate the effect of that flood, and that sort of worked. Now that was a local solution to a local climate change problem. Just making an embankment on having a sustainable investment over a period of time to make that 42-kilometer investment. So you really need to give the local governments a chance, because they are there on the ground, they can assess the situation better. I have the Punjab Green Development Program representatives over here, and perhaps some folks from the Environment Protection Department and the Climate Change Department. So one sign of progress is that the Environment Protection Department is also now the Climate Change Department. Whether they are charged with changing the climate or whether they are charged with actually mitigating it, or that is a separate story. But I would subscribe to the point that the local governments really need to be given a chance. An earlier point, which was in the previous discussion like minutes ago. Internationally, what I've seen is, and this is what I've experienced, that our argument that we do not contribute as much to the GHG emissions, so we are an innocent party, that's not going to sell. It's not going to work, because over a period of time with more evidence and data, your attitudes and your actions toward climate change are regarded as either responsible behavior or irresponsible behavior. So they are not looking into your past and saying that you were really not responsible for the problem, so you have enough margin to be lax about it. They are simply looking at whatever behaviors that you have, whatever actions that you are taking. So we really need to have at the Pakistan level, and if possible at the local government level, a climate change effort metrics. That what type of a climate change effort are we making, either in legislation or in something happening on the ground. We need to be able to inventorize this thing, catalog this thing, so that we can tell the world that we are doing something about it, because I can assure this audience, the world is looking at our attitudes towards climate change as we are not the responsible party, as increasingly an irresponsible behavior. We might have got the pass as far as this flood season is concerned, but please do not expect it that if there are recurrent floods, we are going to get the same type of sympathy that we've had this time around. So we need to be very, very wary of this possible development. Thank you.
Fair point, Umar Saab, absolutely. And I appreciate your point about local government capacity and how it's necessary to have that capacity. I'm reminded just recently the Lahore High Court stayed the operation of the new master plan of Lahore division. And some of the observations that the court made were that the Lahore Development Authority didn't appear to have much of an environment or climate related approach to the master plan. और उसके नतीजे में LDA ने क्या किया? They formulated a climate plan which involved an anti-encroachment drive on roads. Speaking of local government capacity of understanding the problem, ये problem है, उन्होंने फिर hawkers को पे डंडा चलाना शुरू कर दिया. Mujtaba Sahab, you've just come from Islamabad, where just a few days ago, the Ministry of Climate Change has launched the National Clean Air Policy, which is a major achievement, I will concede. But I would like you to speak about it and some of the impacts it hopes to make. Could you give us a brief summary of what the ministry was trying to do?
So first of all, I think we already have a smog policy in Punjab, and probably a policy and a plan of action on clean air as well. So from our perspective, we had actually conducted a study where we developed a baseline that where are we going from this point onwards in future. So our policy, as a matter of fact, is based on some kind of an evidence where we had actually relied on credible data with the support of an international institute, Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and the Swedish, one of the institutes in Stockholm. So we started off from there, but the difference in terms of the policy that we have, we are looking at the integration of the greenhouse gases which are part and parcel of actually the overall air pollution. So it's actually both the gases which are contributing to the GHGs and also contributing to the air pollution problem. And the stats are quite alarming. I mean, the figures are like 235,000 deaths in Pakistan from this issue. And with the passage of time, this phenomena of whether you call it fog, smog, or air pollution, or whatever, I mean, this is increasing with the passage of time. So the Climate Change Ministry came up with a framework for action and also looked at the implementation arrangements for that. And I would really pinpoint one thing here, that we need to really develop our capacities, not only at the federal level, whereby the federal EPA lacks the wherewithal in terms of the human as well as the technological capacity. And I was shocked to see that there are only 3 air pollution monitoring stations at the federal level, and probably Punjab has more than that, probably 8 or no, I think 8 or 10. So with the assistance of the World Bank support for the Green Punjab program. So not only the federal capacity, but the provincial capacity, and even down to the district and the local level capacity that we need to develop. And for that, yes, we do have a policy, but unless and until we focus on the capacity, we will not solve this issue. And so we have identified certain sectors, transport being contributing the major part of it. And I was, it was a surprise to me that in terms of the policy, we relied on a figure of like 43% pollution coming from the transport sector, whereby I have learned today that it's even more than 80% for Lahore maybe. But in our case, so we have identified transport, the emissions from the industrial sector, from the agriculture sector, because there's a misconception that, you know, probably it's a transboundary issue, and whatever is burnt on the other side in Punjab and Haryana and all the adjoining provinces of India, which is actually contributing to the issue in Punjab, whereas this is not. This is actually the pollution, the emissions coming from the transport, from the industrial emissions, from the agriculture, from the residential, from the building sector, from the waste management, as a matter of fact. So all these sectors are contributing to the air pollution. So we have looked at all the sectors and we have identified prioritized actions in terms of short, medium and long-term solution. Thank you.
I know that the urban unit has published or just released these 2 sectoral studies, emissions inventory for Lahore and for Punjab. And these now are an update of the previous inventory that would, or the source apportionment take, those are 18 mein FA or Agriculture Department in Nikali thi, where they looked at 11 rice growing districts in Punjab, because wo paddy burning wahan hoti hai na, and said that based on that 43% of year-long pollution in Punjab was from the transport sector. These are definitely steps in the right direction, giving us much better understanding of where the problem is coming from. I know Hassan is here, one of the authors. I want I want, I want to know how much the tikka kebabs and the barbecues in our cities contribute to air pollution. I do think that there is a significant amount we're not following over there. That also, the production of which. But perhaps, Umar Sahib, you could give us a brief insight as to what these two documents are and what you hope or what the urban unit was thinking of when they were commissioning this bit of research.
Let me tell you the true story behind it. Honestly, I was not even thinking about it. Hira, can you step forward? She is a research associate at the urban unit. She's got an environment science qualification. I'm just the urban planner over here. And she kept peeking into my room, and I was busy, and she kept peeking in, and I said, what's the matter? Do you want to leave, or are you resigning from the urban unit? Because these days many people are resigning from the urban unit. And she said, sir, I've done this emission inventory, and it is 88% and it's not 44%. I'm very much aware of the 44% figure because it is now quoted in almost every provincial government, presentation, that it is 44% from transport and 20% from rice burning, etc. And then I said, this is quite startling, but honestly, I then asked her to sit down. Then I called in Hassan, and then I called in Abid Saab, and I then said, please run me through that what exactly you guys have actually done to come up with this number, because you are flying in the face of conventional government wisdom over here. And then I came to know that, this is a tier 1 calculation. This is not a tier 3 calculation, which is much more sophisticated. This is what, ladies and gentlemen, this is basically a back of the envelope calculation. So even if you were given, a couple of days of training and you were given the right data sets, even you could do it for your own cities if those, cities had those data sets, or the activity quotients, as we say. Now, this is what is most surprising as far as the government is concerned, that one research associate comes up with this thing, and the chief executive of the urban unit is asking himself that, what have you done, and please run me through this thing. If the chief executive of the urban unit is asking this question, what about the rest of the government? I mean, they are involved in their day-to-day problems, in their day-to-day challenges. So, I mean, this is both an example of a low-hanging fruit and our inability to even realize this low-hanging fruit. And once you have this emission inventory, and once it has been verified and third-party tested, this is my insistence on that. I don't want to run it as an original urban unit thing, but I want it to be, also verified. This just changed the whole ball game for us. We really have to now look at the transportation issue in a much more integrated fashion. We have to look at the transport department. We have to bring on the environment protection department. We have to bring on Lahore Development Authority as far as the roads and the transport planning is concerned. And then start thinking about that, how do you bring down this number? This is as simple as that. People say that this thing cannot be quantified. I'm telling you that this thing can be quantified. But we really have to put our act together. And I think this is, this is very, very important. And I would advise the urban unit that please do a translation of this in Urdu also. Because obviously the English language, I always feel, as far as climate change is concerned, is a big barrier. Even for people who know the English language, the climate change language is a big barrier. So, you really need to, if you want to get this message across to the local government level, you have to even change the medium in which you are actually giving the message. So, thank you very much, Hira, and I would ask everybody to applaud the effort.
Great work. Great work. I'm told.
I would just like to say one thing, that one thing, the task was assigned to me was Sir Hassan Ilyas. He just came to me and he said, you have to develop this emission inventory and just find out the methodology.
and he's the total guiding process in it, and he was the one that entrusted a newcomer with this process. I have only worked for 1 year in urban unit, and Sahasra was the one who encouraged me. And then when I was able to develop it finally, Sir Abid eventually immediately owned it. He took he said that I will take you to CEO, you have to present your work, and I will take this book to that forum. I will take this book to that forum. You have done a great work, and Sir Abid has given me much appreciation. Even this is all because of Sir Abid that I am standing here and CEO.
It's your good work. Told by the organizer Sabha that we are out of time. Is that so, Sabha? Okay, all right. Is there anything you want to add, or the launch of the report, perhaps?
Again, holding this mic with a big thank you to all the panelists and the moderator for a very dynamic and very thought-provoking session. I think it's fair to say that this kind of conversation is just a beginning, and such kind of sessions needs to be happen again and again, because it comes with a lot of questions and a lot of solutions and challenges. Because climate change is not a distant problem. It's not distant in time, it's not distant in space. We have seen 800,000 deaths we are talking about it due to air pollution attributed diseases. So this is the extent. So I'll just take few more minutes and talk about the emission inventory reports which were developed under the Space Technology Application in Socio-Economic Development Progress project. So there are two emission inventory. The sectoral emission inventory of Lahore is the first district scale attempt in Punjab to measure atmospheric pollutants, and it's across the 6 developing sector. The second one is jointly developed by the SPARCO and the urban unit. That's on the provincial scale, which estimates the particulate matter as well as the gaseous pollutant from 1990 to 2020. I think these are two very exciting reports, and I'm sure this information has popped up a lot of questions in your mind. So please do visit on the urban unit website. All the details, all the reports are available there. And some of the hard copies are also available on a stall at Hall 1. So now I would like the panelists to come few steps ahead, and I would request CEO Urban Unit to present the souvenirs and the books to the panelists.